Hi, I'm Armanis. I'm an Aisha Bochandani intern here at the Frick Collection. The object that we'll be taking a closer look at is this porcelain incense burner that's in the form of a seated Buddhist divinity. It's about 4 inches tall, and it was made by the Meissen Porcelain Manufactory in Germany during the late 1710s. Despite our impulse to associate this object with Buddhism because of what it's called, it was made by German craftsmen in the early 18th century in a categorically non-Buddhist culture and context. In making this object, the craftsmen at Meissen were indeed inspired by images and objects imported from Asia. It's important to note that the so-called Buddhist divinity then be understood as a copy, maybe even a caricature. It looks like a Buddhist deity, but in some ways it's not identifiable because its makers were not Buddhist. In 18th century Europe, figures like this would have been called simply pagods, which is a term related to the word pagoda that describes, quote, Far Eastern deities, unquote. Modeled after imported representations of deities from varying Asian cultures coming in prints, paintings, porcelain, and other materials, porcelain pagods were immensely popular in Europe. The Meissen manufactory made a bunch of them, and one of them is this one on view at Frick Madison. This pagod is a creamy, lustrous white color. It has an almost liquid quality like freshly poured milk. He wears a silky robe that drapes over him, bunching around his seated body. The fabric almost cascades off his shoulders, revealing his bare chest and his belly, which rolls in on itself as he sits. A distended lower belly, like this one, is a sign of fullness and auspiciousness in Buddhism. The Buddha and other deities are often shown in a moment of yogic inhalation, a deep meditative breath filling their stomachs. Seeing him in profile, not only do we see that his bald head gleams white, but the deep holes where each of his ears are and his elongated earlobes become more apparent as well. Earlobes that droop down as such are another sign of his divine status. Like the Buddha, whose lobes droop because of the heavy, princely earrings he has given up in his quest for enlightenment, this figure's earlobes show us that he, too, has renounced the weight of the material world. Panning down, we see that his left hand sits flat and tight against his left leg and is really easy to miss. His right hand, however, juts forward and is cupped with his fingers pointing up. When I first saw this hand, I thought he was performing a Buddhist hand gesture, what's known as a mudra. But the figure's hand is actually bent because it used to hold a teacup and saucer that has since snapped off. And this brings our attention to the props that he is staged with. Teapots, cups, saucers, and a long smoking pipe, which inundate the deity in a blank sea of ivory glazed wares, drawing attention to the abundance of unpainted surfaces in this incense burner. Taking a closer look at his face, we see him wearing a wide, toothy grin and an open smile, almost like he's caught in a booming laugh. Whether this object was actually used to burn incense remains unclear, but if used, the incense was supposed to be placed inside the figure, and the smoke was meant to eject from the figure's mouth and from the holes in each of his ears. I'm imagining the smoke roaming around in the porcelain figure before dribbling or oozing out of his open mouth and his ears, the heavy white smoke matching the liquidity of the porcelain. I was drawn to the figure's large smile, but its functional aspects initially surprised me. When I was thinking about this as a Buddhist figure, I read the smile to be that of the Laughing Buddha, who might be familiar to many of us. The name the Laughing Buddha, I should note, is just a colloquial English language name for a humorous Zen Buddhist deity that, until I had done this project, I hadn't really realized how often I'd seen his face. One of my favorite restaurants has a green Laughing Buddha figurine by the register. I learned that he has many names across cultures. I've written some of them and put them down here. He's pretty easy to recognize. He's large, The words chubby, corpulent, and even roly-poly have come up in my readings about him. So large that his robe can barely contain his belly, which inevitably pokes out. He's bald, and he carries a sack with all of his worldly possessions. Sometimes he's also carrying a fan. He loves children, and he loves to laugh. As his many names and his enduring presence suggest, he has a knack for crossing cultural and linguistic boundaries. And pagods that are identified as the Laughing Buddha were being fabricated in Germany, England, and France throughout the 18th century. Here we have just 3 examples. We have this one from Germany, which nods. We have this one from Chelsea, and then we have this one from France, which is also an ornate mantle clock. Because of his popularity, the Laughing Buddha's image is deeply entangled within the European pagode. A close comparison of the Frick's pagode against traditional Laughing Buddha figures from across Asia and across media, for example, reveal all the ways the Meissen craftsmen got the Laughing Buddha wrong. All around me, we have a spread of Laughing Buddha objects made in Asia to give us an idea as to 1, how the Laughing Buddha is traditionally represented, and 2, the diversity of Laughing Buddha objects. Here we have a print from Japan, we have a bronze work from Thailand, we have a ceramic incense burner from Japan, and another porcelain object from China. In contrast to the Laughing Buddhas, the Meissen pagode is not carrying a sack or a fan. He's not really all that fat, and his elongated earlobes are not actually attached to his ears. They seem to be extra mounds of porcelain that start slightly below where his ears end. His smile, beyond functional, is also a bit unsettling and not at all warm in the same way that the smiles of the Laughing Buddhas are. They look soft and cuddly, and the Meissen pagode looks petrified and kind of cold. Lastly, it's not typical to see Buddhist deities encumbered by many objects because Buddhism teaches against material attachment. The Laughing Buddha's thing is that he's a beggar monk with only the robe on his back and whatever is in his bag. When I look at the Meissen pagode, it's strange to see a Buddhist deity with so much stuff. But Europeans and collectors were not interested in pagodes for their adherence to Buddhism. To them, they were peculiar Oriental collectibles to be displayed in the home. In these 2 works by Francois Boucher, we can see pagodes' presence in 18th century European interiors and the ways that they also slipped through media. They could be found in paintings, prints, and porcelain. The image on the left, titled Le Déjeuner, shows a family over breakfast, and the image on the right, which is one view at Frick Madison, titled A Lady on Her Daybed, shows us exactly that, a lady on her daybed. A closer look at the background of these intimate interiors reveals a visitant among the house's porcelain wares, the pagode. I love putting these 2 pictures next to each other, centering and lining up the pagodes in this way because we see that they are both presiding over the painting's main subjects and their homes. Their once quiet presence feels so important to the visual narratives Boucher is telling, what he's saying in these paintings about the inner lives and priorities of his contemporaries, the rituals and ornaments they keep. Boucher's own interest in pagodes is also slipping into these compositions, not just because he was an avid Orientalist and collector, but because he actually owned 7 nodding pagodes according to a sale catalog. Some of Boucher's nodding pagodes even had tongues that moved. And it's cool to think that even among the nodding pagodes, there were differences in what parts of them moved. One of the most interesting aspects of pagodes to me is actually that they're all so different from one another, different sizes with different treatments and cast from different molds. The more pagodes I see, the more the Frick's Meissen pagode, the one that we started with here on the left, strikes me because of its blankness. All the pagodes on the right, these 3, and the ones that are highlighted in the photograph, were all fabricated at Meissen, so the same factory that fabricated this pagode. And here we see the breadth of design just within one manufactory. Many Meissen pagodes were white, what was known as China white or Blanc de Chine, but so many others were painted with these beautiful and sometimes strange patterns and colors. And some of them were big, some of them were small, some knotted, some were used as incense burners. We see that this guy here is lipstick. This guy's entire body is painted, and with these different parts of their heads and faces are accentuated with paint. I actually really love this photo on the right taken in the 1930s. It shows a display case full of Meissen porcelain, and you can see how many pagades are present, 6 by my count, although it's kind of hard to see. One really gets the sense that pagades are an important character in the ensemble cast that made up porcelain collections. Sometimes I imagine what people thought of their porcelain pagades, how they made them feel, and what kinds of ideas and associations they gave them about Buddhist or Far Eastern cultures. As someone whose own art making practice considers the domestic, the devotional, and the decorative and how those bring together distant worlds, I found this pagade and its material porcelain to be so rich. It really underscores the capacities of porcelain to act as a portal between visual and material cultures across space and time. After investigating this incense burner and other Meissen pagades, I see porcelain as a site for artistic exchange, a meeting ground between Europe and Asia, two worlds that in the 1710s, when this pagade was made, were still in many ways alien from one another, but were also opening up to each other in so many small and fascinating ways. And I invite you to come see this incense burner on view at Frick Madison, along with the rest of the porcelain collection, because I still think they retain those portal-like powers. It just takes a bit of patience and many, many closer looks. Thank you.